Catch my breath here. Well, good evening. I'm not Richard Foster, though I'd like to be. My name is Jim Smith, and I'm here to introduce our speaker. George said earlier that God is beautiful, and indeed God is beautiful, and God makes beautiful things. And one of the beautiful things he has made is the person who is speaking to us tonight. She and her husband Lynn live up in the Northwest, and they've been medical missionaries for years. You already heard a story earlier today from her. I think she's one of the best storytellers I've ever met. And she's pretty sprightly, too, if you get to know her. Richard introduced her to me years ago and said, you ought to play tennis with her, because I like to play tennis, and she's pretty good. So I went out and played, and she whooped me. And then afterwards, Richard said, you know, she's a grandma. And thanks, Richard. Appreciate that. She has a lot of energy and enthusiasm. She loves life. She loves people. She loves God. And you're going to love hearing from her. Let's give a warm welcome to Marti Ensign.
Well, I don't know. I think we were having entirely too much fun tonight. I don't know what God's going to think about this. You know, I used to have such a sort of dumb concept about God. In fact, when I was a teenager in high school, and I first felt called to missionary service, I thought that probably God looked down and saw me having too much fun and thought, I can fix that. And, you know, I had my concept of missionaries. They had come around, you know, hair pulled back in a bun until it straightened out their eyebrows, and I thought they never were going to smile and laugh again. But I'll tell you, when I was struggling with this call, it was about the first time in my life that I had ever just consciously said no to the Lord. I asked him into my life as a small child, and although I was mischievous and I did get in trouble, I really wanted to obey Christ. But here was something he was asking me to do that I just thought I have my life pretty well planned. I was going to be a woman lawyer, you know, and get paid for talking all day. I thought that was about the epitome of it. And here he was calling me to missionary service. But you know, saying no to the promptings of the Holy Spirit is such a miserable place to be that pretty soon I thought anything is better than this. I'll go to China or Africa, wherever it's better than this burden that I'm carrying. And I said yes to the Lord, and of course God knew me just as he knows you. He knows what will fulfill your life, what gifts he wants to use, what will make you walk in joy and victory in the kingdom. And so I went to Africa. Well, you know that wasn't the end of my fun and laughter. And I mean, we had plenty of chances to just really enjoy God and what he was doing. And I remember once we had a little custom on our mission station, because we were in one of the poorest countries in the world, and we used to sell our clothes, you know, when they got too stretched or they were faded or something. Now, don't think we were mercenary. We didn't sell them because we needed money. We sold them. First, we started giving them away, but that caused some jealousies, and, you know, they'd say, Juana gave him a long sleeve shirt, and he only gave me a short sleeve shirt, you know, that kind of thing. So we decided, okay, we'll make it democratic. We just put it out on a table, small price tag on each one. We went up past the house of one of our missionary teachers who was going home for good, and she was selling off everything. And missionaries were quite horrified to see out on her table to sell one of these old-fashioned undergarments. Well, this is 20th century. It was a girdle, okay? And you probably nobody in this room is old enough to remember they used to have little metal things down them, you know, stays down, and then they had little fasteners on the bottom to fasten your stockings to. So we begged this woman not to put that out for sale. We said these people wouldn't know what to do with that, but she was kind of snitty, you know, and she said, no, somebody might get some good out of this. So out it went on the table. Well, you can imagine Sunday morning when the missionaries went to church, and the man who bought it came wearing it as a vest with the little fasteners hooked over each shoulder. very bad, very bad. I just thought if we catch anybody's eye, I'm on the floor. I think the Lord loves to see you have fun and to laugh and to hear music like this. Only I'll tell you something. If we'd have had music like that in my country, they would have been out dancing in the aisles. They wouldn't have been sitting just clapping neatly like you people were. But I know you were enjoying it. Well, I've gotten kind of carried away this meeting with all this good spiritual food. That's better. All this great spiritual food we've been having, and I kind of got carried away with a concept that Dr. Willard gave us about our epitaphs. You know, what would we like on the tombstone? Like he said, she had good teeth. Now, I don't think that would turn me on, but maybe she was a size 8 or you know, she drove a Peugeot. I don't know. But the reason that it interested me particularly is I have a little side hobby, and that is that I like to collect epitaphs off of old tombstones. And sometimes they give you a lot of insight into our humanness because, you know, we spend a lot of time and money on the visible, temporal, passing away things, especially if you're my gender. You know, if our hair is straight, we want to curl it and get a perm, and if it's too curly, we want to straighten it and we want to change the color of it. And we spend a lot of time in front of the mirror and money. And you know, we diet. I don't know if you do that down here, but in where I live, everybody has their favorite diet. You know, no protein, no carbohydrate. My favorite diet is the garlic diet. You don't lose weight, but from that distance, you look a lot smaller. So. But anyway, this is actually on a tombstone. I believe it is in the state of Maryland. And it's on the grave of a man named Jonathan Pease. And it says, "Under the sky, beneath these trees, here lies the body of Jonathan Pease. It's not really peas, it's just the pod. Peas shelled out and went to God." Which may tell you that the thing we spend all of our energy and time and money on isn't going to last after all. So we've been trying this week to concentrate on the invisible inner life of the Spirit that's going to live forever and serve God forever and glorify Him forever. And you know, we've been studying this wonderful message of Jesus and these Beatitudes, which are just among the treasures of the world. We get so excited if we hear a quote from someone. People just spend ages of time memorizing speeches of Abraham Lincoln or somebody who said something quite famous. But we don't hang on the word. Every word that Jesus speaks has meaning and purpose in our lives. And we need to pay attention to it. We need to hang on it. We need to memorize it. And we love these blesseds. I hope you all have memorized the Beatitudes and in the right order, because there is a progression in them. And I think we know by now that these are not commandments of God or calls to action. He's simply stating the way things are. These people are blessed not because of their state or because of something they're doing or struggling to do. They're blessed because the kingdom of God is available to them. Now, there are plenty of commands in the Bible. I'm not saying they're not there. There are plenty of things that we are asked to do. But just are not things that He's commanding or even instructing us to do. It just proclaims the availability of the kingdom of God to everyone. It proclaims that the great grace of God poured out on all flesh blesses people just because he's God and we're his creation and he loves us. We could spend a whole conference like this probably on grace. We sing Amazing Grace, and that's about the only adjective that really starts to capture God's grace. God is kind to the wicked and the ungrateful, Luke tells us in Luke 6:35. Now, I wouldn't do it like that, would you? It's a good thing I'm not God, because some of these people that reject him and lift themselves up, I would just withhold the breath for a little while, and get rid of them. But God just graciously goes on blessing even when they rebel against him, even when they're in sin. I think Romans is so wonderful. Romans 5, 6, 7, 8 have a whole bunch of how much more. And you know what it said? It said if God loved us so much, even when we were rebellious, sinners, turning against him, how much more? Now that we're his children, will his grace and mercy reach out to us in every circumstance and bless us? And he doesn't do that just for our selfish ends. He expects us to be dispensers of his grace around the world. Now, I know many people who say, well, you just don't understand what people have done to me, or you don't understand my circumstances, or you wouldn't expect me to be victorious and offer forgiveness and give grace. And they tell me about these terrible situations they live in, and they said, God just can't bless me where I am. And my answer to that is he sure can't bless you where you're not. I mean, he has to start someplace. He has to start where you are. He's not necessarily going to change the visible circumstances of your life, but he can change your heart, the invisible part of you, to be in his kingdom. Now, grace, like forgiveness, maybe even a synonym of forgiveness, is expected to be meted out to others the way God meets it out to us. You know the wonderful story of the debtor that owed a huge debt that he could not pay, and he was forgiven that, and instead of rejoicing in it and it making him generous, he went out and collared someone who owed him a very small debt that was payable. But you know something? We don't just give grace to the people who are kind to us and who keep the rules. Jesus made this very clear in that sermon. Now, if we just have people over that have us over, and we love the ones who love us, and we ask them to dinner, and then they ask us to dinner, and they pump up our ego, it's not teaching us anything about kingdom living. All of us want the good life. I decided to try to figure out what are some of the things that we Americans must have if we have the good life. I think one sign is that you get 4 or 5 telemarketing calls during your dinner hour. That must mean that you're on the list. Or maybe if you have to pay twice as much for your car registration because it's so big and new, that might signify that you have the good life. There even is a company now, I'm sorry I didn't bring the clipping out of the paper. It was advertising in our local paper in Olympia, Washington, was advertising the www.alibi.com, a service so that if you want to cheat on your wife, you can call this service and they will call as if they were your office or your hotel and confirm that you're doing business for them so that you can be in any kind of sin you want to. That's certainly the good life. What are we looking for? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think life and liberty is in the Bible, but I didn't find pursuit of happiness. Dr. Tony Campolo loves to tell people that he asked in Japan, he asked parents, what do you want for your child? What do you want for your children? Almost all of them said, we want them to be a success. So he asked several Italians, what do you want for your children? We want them to be good. We want them to be good children. But do you know, if you ask the typical American, what do you want for your children? We want them to be, we want them to be happy. Never mind the goodness, hopefully the success, but we want them to be happy. We want them to be able to have all the recreation and pleasure that they need. Have you tried during these days, you people who are church leaders, have you tried to get people to commit to come to choir practice every week and then be sure and show up on Sunday to sing in your choir or teach Sunday school class? Well, or actually commit to anything without distraction. You see, we have to get out and recreate. I know people that go to the gym, to the health club to get a workout, and they circle the parking lot for 15 minutes to get the parking place closest to the door so they can get in and get their exercise. I mean, we don't make really good sense, do we, in what's the good life? Someone has said, when our destination and our treasures are someplace else, things here cease to look so critical. And you know, when our eyes are fixed on Jesus and we're walking in the kingdom, all of these other things fade away. Jesus in the book of Luke kind of turned the Beatitudes around, and I looked through that list of woes, and I thought every one of those that he's saying woe are things that people are seeking for. He said, how sad for you who have wealth. How sad for you that are well fed. Never know hunger so that you have to depend on God for your food. We have a wonderful friend who was our bishop from Rwanda, and the church got together. He's a very brilliant mind. They decided to send him over to India to go to a seminary. And they were going to send him so much each month to pay his expenses over there. And he took his wife and his 2 little children, and he went to Yotmal, India. And he wasn't there very long until this Hutu-Tutsi conflict broke out, and the church couldn't send him money. There they were, stuck in a very poor foreign land at school, and their money from home wasn't coming. They set aside every Sunday afternoon just to go on their knees, on their face before the Lord, and pray in the food and the supplies for the next week. He said it was absolutely remarkable how God answered prayer. A lot of them, they don't know till this day. Bags of groceries, sacks of wheat appeared on their front porch by Monday morning. But one day, Bishop Aaron was feeling really down. You know, when you're tired and you've struggled for a long time. And he said, you know, just before he came to India to study, the government in his country had offered him a very high position. He would have had the good life. He would have had a nice car. He would have had servants. He would have had a nice office. And here he was in India, just struggling every week to get enough to eat. And he was talking to this old pastor, and he was kind of complaining to the Lord. And he said, you know, I thought because I was doing what God asked me to do, you know, God told those men to get in the boat and go to the other side, and they were doing it, and they still got in trouble. And he said, I thought because I was being obedient to God, he would take better care of me. And the old pastor said, well, Aaron, how much do you figure God owes you? I'd like to take care of that, he said. So Aaron said he never said another word. That was enough for him. But you know, we have trouble thinking God's thoughts. We have trouble thinking like he does, seeing the big picture, seeing the eternal picture. Vice President Matongo in the Congo wrote this about their recent war. We thank God for the looting and the war. It shows us how little work we have really done, how shallow the faith of our people is. Do not pray for an easy time for us. Pray that we will be strengthened through the hard times. We are celebrating 75 years of being a church, but we are so weak and splintered. We need to go through the fire to be made useful to the Lord, just like our ancestors fired their pottery before it was useful. Pray for unity. Pray for love. We could be strong if we let Christ really make a difference in our lives. We need to take charge of things and be responsible. We do not lack money. We lack unity and confidence in each other. Do you think that could be written about the American church? Maybe we need to be put in the furnace, put in the fire, more than we have. We get complacent. One of my heroes is a woman missionary doctor named Helen Roosevelt. She went to the best medical schools in England, and then God called her down to a place in the middle of Congo, Africa, called Nibabongo, where they hadn't any medical help at all. She was a good surgeon. She went down there, and people flocked to her for her medical help. They brought her little babies that were dying of pneumonia, and just one or two magic shots of that muti that she had in the little jars, and the baby came to life again. And she did surgery, and people got up and walked. But they weren't listening to her message. They were very concerned to get their bodies in shape, but they weren't listening to what she was talking to them about their hearts and about sin and forgiveness. She was plugging away, and she finally realized that she could no longer set her operating table under the trees because twigs kept coming down, there were flies, and she'd have to have a building. Those were the years of the how-to books, remember? She wrote back to England and asked her mother, please send me a book on how to build a hospital. Her mother looked around, sent back word, and said, I can't find a book on how to build a hospital, but I found this book about how to make bricks. Will that be a start? So Helen read so much cement, so much sand, put them together, and then she was making bricks. Well, their boards were planed so badly that they had little cracks in them, and little spines of the cement went out. So when you took the brick out of the mold, there were little cement spines around, and they would build nicely, fit nicely together. So she showed her workers how to take a trowel and knock those little spines off of the outside of the bricks so they could build with them. Well, they weren't moving very fast for Helen, and the bricks weren't getting de-spined, and so one Saturday afternoon she decided to go out there and show them how fast this could be done. And while she was doing it, she said she was praying, and she was telling the Lord that surely there was some man in England that ought to be out there building that hospital. She was a surgeon. She was trained, these were valuable hands, and here she was out there doing that work, and God ought to put the bee on somebody back home to get out there and build that hospital. And she was discouraged because people weren't getting saved. One or two people had come to Christ, her head dispenser, and maybe one other person. And she's knocking those spines off of the bricks, and she felt her hands were wet, and suddenly she looked down. Her hands were full of tiny cuts, and they were bleeding. And then she really told the Lord about that man in England that ought to be there doing this. Just about that time, they came and called her for surgery. She said when she was standing there scrubbing with that strong soap, and then she had to hold those hands out for them to pour alcohol over them, and it got it. She said she just lost it. She just started crying and bawling, and she jammed her hands into the gloves and somehow got through that surgery. But then she went to her room, and she just decided she was going to just rest through the afternoon. In the morning, she had been doing the Sunday services. She just went to bed. The next morning, she got up and expected the 12 or 14 people to come to church, because if they wanted a paycheck from her, they had to attend worship service on Sunday morning. She got up to the church. She couldn't believe it. The little church was crammed out. There were people standing all around the church looking in the windows trying to get inside. She just gave a simple gospel message. And her usual invitation, people just flooded up, started praying and repenting. And she and her head dispenser were just praying with them pretty soon. It was exhausting. And when the last one went away, she turned to her head dispenser and she said, "Andre, what happened? What is this?" He said, "Well, Madamo, you know, when you stand there in that white gown and that mask and that cap, and we know that you have the power of life and death in your hands, you terrify us. We didn't know how to take you. But when we saw that your hands bled and we saw that you cried and you were sorrowful like we did, and we wondered what kind of love would make you leave your job in Kizungu land, the white man's land, and come here, and we realized that you really love us and that there must be something to this gospel you're preaching." You know, friends, sometimes the way up is down. Sometimes it isn't always the way we would do things. We seek the kingdom of God first and his righteousness, and all these eternal necessary things will come to us. But don't please misunderstand me. Not all the visible things in your life are going to turn up right. They're not automatically going to be righted because you come to Christ and surrender to him and give him everything. In fact, Tante Croytin Boom used to say, you know, everything was pretty good till I surrendered everything to Christ, and then the Civil War began. And you know, it's when God's will and ours is in that struggle period that sometimes it feels like the Civil War. But all the process things in your life might continue. But what a loving God we serve. He's going to see you through, whether the boat sinks or not. Michelangelo was asked once, "How did you make such a magnificent statue as your David?" His answer was, "Well, you simply take a block of marble and then you chip away everything that doesn't look like David." Do you feel sometimes like God is making a work of art to show the world, a trophy of his grace? Who's really has the good life? The psalmist tells us in Psalm 32, 1 and 2, "The one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered, who has a security that lasts forever." He said, at God's right hand there are pleasures forevermore. He wants you to have a great time. He wants you to walk in joy and victory. He wants you to be a subject of his kingdom. But there's a little problem. You see, you can't live in two kingdoms at the same time. You have to make a choice. And sometimes that choice is a tough one to make. I suppose you've heard about the little girl who was having her 7th birthday, and she lived in a small town. Any of you know what a real dime store is? I don't mean Kmart. I mean, you know, it was a little dime store, cresses with a plate glass window, and there were always displays in there, and she had to pass the store on her way up to school, and she thought she'd like to watch and see what they did in the windows, you know. And this one day she went by, and here was a beautiful string of pearls on a black velvet background. And these beautiful, genuine pearls were $1. And she just coveted those pearls. She thought that's what she wanted for her birthday. She didn't mention anything else. She just wanted those pearls. She'd go by and look at them on her way to school. Then her birthday came, and her mom had a little party for her, and her friends over. She opened her packages. Here was a book and a new purse, and her mother had given her a new outfit. And she got down to the last package. No pearls. Now, she had been taught to be grateful, so she said thank you to everybody, but she went to bed, just feeling kind of disappointed. The next day she got up. When the mail came, there was a birthday card from her grandma. You know what was in it? $1 bill. Oh man, she almost burned the road up. Getting up to that 10-cent store, she was so afraid somebody may have gotten those beautiful $1 pearls before she got up there. She went in the store waving the $1 bill, and the storekeeper was so impressed with her zeal that he didn't even charge her the tax. He just took those pearls out and put them around her and did that little cheap clasp, and she danced home, and she said, "Oh, Mom, look, aren't they beautiful? See, I got my pearls. Don't they make me look grown up? Don't you like them?" Her mother said, "Yes, dear. They're very nice. They're very beautiful." "Oh, Mom, can I wear them to bed?" "No, I don't think that'd be a good idea." But Mom, tomorrow is show and tell at school. Can I take them to show and tell?" "Sure, but right now I want you to go because your dad's coming home." She flew out the back door, threw herself in her dad's arms, little arms around his neck, legs around his waist. "Oh, Daddy, you're home. I love you. I got my pearls. Daddy, you're the best daddy in the whole world. I really love you." "Good. Jane, you really love me?" "Yeah." "Could I have your pearls?" "Daddy, just give it to Dad." "Well, no." And she slipped down out of his arm. He was very quiet at supper. She didn't fuss about going up to bed. When she got up the next morning, her dad had gone to work, and she went off to school, and drove her teacher crazy. Look, Miss Miller, I got my pearls. When is it show and tell yet?" "No, Jane, just sit down." Finally got through the school day. She went home. Daddy was home already. He was sitting in his big chair, feet up on the ottoman, and just reading the paper by the fire. Jane crawls into his lap and pushes the newspaper down and says, "Daddy, I really love you." "Good. Give me your pearls." "Daddy, you know the little treasure box I have upstairs? It has all the things. I'll bring it down. You can choose anything you want out of the box." "No, Jane, I just want the pearls." "Daddy." But pretty soon, she just reluctantly took off those wonderful pearls and dropped them limply into Daddy's hand. Daddy turned around and just flicked them into the fire, and they went because, of course, they were plastic. And then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the string of beautiful, cultured, genuine pearls with a sterling silver clasp, which he had had all the time, waiting for her surrender. Why do we hang on to the temporal, the kingdom that's not going to last forever, the visible, when God has treasures that we can't even estimate the value of, holding for us to put into our empty hand? God bless you.
Is DW here? Lovely. Come. Thank you, Marty. I love that. Could I have your pearls?
Not my pearls.
Dallas, maybe, I don't know if you have a comment or two about Marty's presentation, anything that struck you as she was speaking.
Well, I think she simply put it right to our hearts. When you think of all the things that we identify with the good life, especially in this country, I think we have a better sense of reality in this group. But even for us, if you simply put it in terms of what we put our time into thinking about, many of us, if we would put as much time into a sensible program of spiritual disciplines as we would into our physical health, course, we could have both. There's just something that pulls us away, that deflects us. I think that alertness is what we need, spiritual alertness. And every day, check in. What are we really living for?
You think that's the Romans passage about the sin that so easily besets us?
Yes, that's
Lay
right.
aside every weight. And you have to take an inventory every once in a while to know what the weights are.
That's very true. And to distinguish between the weights and the sins. And
Now,
not necessarily,
I want you to say
well, not necessarily just congratulate ourselves that we're not sinning, you know. What are the
sinning.
weights? Yes, what are the weights that are sitting there instead of, and as we go off into our pursuit of life, liberty, or our life, liberty, and the pursuit of silliness often, it's just good to keep the check there and say, now what is really profitable in the light of God's kingdom?
I heard you once speak about the two unquestioned assumptions of our culture.
Yes. The two unquestioned values of our culture are freedom and pleasure, which is often confused with happiness. If you ask a group of children on a third grade school ground whether everyone ought to be able to do what they want to do, they will tell you absolutely. Everyone should be able to do what they want to do. And that kind of pervasive assumption in our world today, those are really the only two values that are unquestioned. And and of course, if you look at the commercials and everything, you see that that's right there.
We've got some questions if we want questions.
Well,
Would you like to work on that? Now, one of these,
with
I
a little
think,
help from my friends here.
Marty can help. Now, Marty has sort of self-answered this question, but we'll let Dallas say just a word perhaps. And this is a person who at the session took very seriously that concept of Jesus teaching us to do what he would do if he were us, right?
Right.
Say it right.
That's right.
And the question, of course, is from a woman who is concerned particularly about how does that transfer dealing with gender kinds of issues, and particularly specifically asking, would Jesus preach if Jesus were a woman? Would Jesus' ministry have been restricted? And so help us a little with that.
Well, I don't think so. I think Jesus could easily have been a woman. If God had ordained that,
That part of the family.
absolutely right. There's nothing inherently theologically wrong with that. I'm sure that there was a good reason why he was a man in that world. The real question underlying this, of course, is for the woman alive today. Can I reasonably think of Jesus leading my life, as if he were I? And I hope that we will understand that the answer is absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. There's, as far as ministry is concerned, you have to understand that ministry in the kingdom of God is a function, not a position. It's a function, not a position. It is an activity. Those who are called and empowered should minister.
Calling defines the function.
That's right. And the evidence is, of course, precisely in the ministry. In the San Fernando Valley some years ago, we had a wonderful woman who was probably a better preacher than at least 99% of the men in the area. And she was in a church that didn't believe in it, but they really needed her. And their arrangement was that she would not be able to speak from the pulpit. They would set up a music stand, and then they would let her go.
And it would be okay.
It's marvelous how these things work out.
You know, there's a wonderful book in the bookstore on Phoebe Palmer.
Yes, there is. I encourage people to look at that.
Yeah.
Marty was going to say something.
I was just going to say, one of the things that really encouraged me was your description of that we really are spirits, which were given a body to get through this world, and not a body that, happens to be gender oriented, and then God somehow gave us a spirit to match that body. He is spirit, we're in his image, we're spirit, and this has happened to be how we get through this world, isn't it?
And we so desperately need that today, Marty, in our highly civilized country, if that's what it is, because we have trouble conceptualizing one another. And we see white and black, and we see Asian and Western, and we see all these differences. And we don't have a way of thinking about how these are all the same.
Even rich and poor.
Rich and poor, absolutely. And of course the scripture addresses that absolutely head on. And Paul in Colossians 3, when he gets ready to say, you put on the new man, he says, who is renewed in knowledge after the image of him that created him, in which knowledge there is no Greek nor Jew, no circumcision nor uncircumcision, no barbarian, Scythian, bond or free, but Christ is all and in all. And if we have a spiritual conception of the human being, it does not mean we downgrade the importance of the body, but that's another story. If we have a spiritual conception, also in our country, the difference between aged and young is such a tremendous one. To
Dallas,
be able to see
that passage you just quoted, I love the fact it uses and has Scythian in that. Can you help?
Well, the Scythians were the barbarians' barbarian. When the barbarians saw the Scythians coming, they said, they are barbarians. Right? And this is historical. If you read the Greek historian Herodotus, you'll see what the Scythians were like. They scalped their enemies and made towels and washcloths out of them to use. I can't find that very comfortable to think about. They did that, and they were really, when Paul mentions them, he's scraping the bottom of the barrel. That's as far down as it goes.
Wow. One question more before we take a break, and it's a very important question. This comes from a pastor, I'm assuming, and speaks to many, not only pastors, but those in leadership in a lot of different ways, and is really asking the question about finding meaning as a pastor. And this is a moving sentence. I feel as if I am only moving the sand pile back and forth in the compound, and no progress is taking place. Now, what can a person do with that kind of issue?
I would just say two things, and I've found them tremendously effective. And one is to make sure you're preaching the gospel of the kingdom of the heavens. Just preach what Jesus preached. Just do it. If you don't understand it, it'll come to you. Just preach it. And the next thing is begin to encourage people to move into the spiritual disciplines. Lead them into experiences of silence and fasting, scripture memorization, service.
And be an example of that.
Absolutely right. That's the way you do it. You teach it, you show it, you get others to do it, you go back and forth that way. And you will begin to see people move. Yeah. See, a major part, we've heard many people talk about the difficulty in our churches, and how can we be having that difficulty in our churches? We all know that feeling, I think. A major part of the problem, I believe, is simply we are not preaching the right thing. If you listen to what is preached, I mentioned in the Divine Conspiracy, I'll give a long quotation from Peter Wagner, who's very well known, I'm sure, to everyone who's here. And he mentions the oddity of the fact that he can't remember having heard a sermon on the kingdom of the heavens. And then he says, when I look down into my sermon barrel, I realize that I have never preached. And see, that isn't all that uncommon. And the key is, folks, let's teach and preach what Jesus taught and preached. And of course, let's live it.
Yeah.
And that'll take care of this issue, I guarantee you. Now, some of your folks will be leaving, but that's okay too. And remember, there's a different concept of church growth you might use, which is bigger Christians. And I like that one. And you get bigger Christians, you're going to have a lot more of them before long.
Now, Marty, just before we break, we all, of course, have heard of the stories in the countries where you minister. Many of your dear friends were killed in some of those tragedies. Can you give us an encouragement, especially, I don't know if there's anything about leaders, pastors, identity, meaning, the good life?
Well, through all this situation, it's like Kenya during the Mau Mau. We were all wringing our hands saying, oh, it's the end of the Christian church in Kenya, and then when the war was over and the dust settled and the people had been shaken and purified, 70% of the people in Kenya today claim to be Christian. And God said, I'll build my church. And he just goes, and it's the same in Gwanda and Burundi. Our church in Gwanda has doubled since they killed 500,000 people. And people continue, revival continues through that area of the world.
Wow.
So
Thank
we're
you.
excited to go and see about it.